What a wonderful adventure for both of us, you know. It's lovely that she responded to it and made the whole coat.
You know, when you're designing, maybe you're designing patterns, or I know you've done some theatrical knitting as well. How much input do you actually have personally? Is it completely all of you, or do you get a brief?
When I started to make the knitting for As You Like It for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I was going to also do big needlepoint cushions, you know, and they said, "Oh, good. You just give us a little sketch and we'll paint out the cushions." I said, "No way! I'm going to stitch these cushions." And I sat through all the rehearsals of the Shakespeare listening to that wonderful language rolling across my head, and I stitched these huge Shakespearean flowers. Well, it was so lovely to do. And I made 4 enormous ones, which were thrown onto the stage, and you could really see those buggers, you know, from the audience. It was fabulous. So it made something juicy. The light loved the stitches and the actual color of the yarn. It made a very sexy texture. So it was actually a wonderful experience. Wonderful to make and wonderful to see it on a stage.
Another email from Wendy in Maidstone, and she says, "I am so overwhelmed to be watching and hearing the incomparable Kaffe Fassett. Thank you, Create and Craft, for bringing him to us. I'd like to ask Kaffe if there's anything that he would still like to achieve with colour. Has he done so much? He has done so much, but does he still have any ambitions to do with colour that he hasn't done yet?"
You know, I always say my next ambition would be to do something in a huge scale. Like to cover the Empire State Building with tiles, or a tea cozy or something. Do you know what I mean? Something enormous. You know, in Holland, I should have put it in the book. It didn't get into the book, but this was a wonderful thing. A tiny little shop at the top of Holland got 350 women to make little quilts, and they sewed all those quilts together and they ran them up the side of this enormous tall building. Oh, wow. To advertise an exhibition they had of quilting. Well, that was so thrilling. Can you imagine seeing this huge, wonderful quilt blowing in the breeze, you know, outdoors in this little place? It was just absolutely thrilling. So scale is something that I love. I would love to make some big projects that really covered enormous spaces.
So when we see Big Ben with a tea cozy on top of it, you know who's going to be responsible for that.
You'll know that it was yarn bombed by Kaffe Fassett.
Yarn bombed it like that.
You know, it's very interesting because these yarn bombers that are out there making things that cover trees and cover, you know, lamp posts and things like that. I totally understand that urge. It's exciting. I love it. You know, they love to knit, those people, and they find a way of making our lives a little more colorful with it.
There's a section in your book about your TV work. How did you get involved in TV?
Well, I was asked, you know, to come on a couple of programs. What happened actually is I went to Channel 4 to do a series, and they said, well, go home and, you know, make us a storyboard and do the whole thing. And I started making the storyboard, and I thought, they're never going to go for my ideas, and I just abandoned the whole thing, and I just left it. And then about a year later, I went back because I had another book that was coming out, and I thought this book would really be good for television. And the head of Channel 4 said, "Where were you? We've been waiting for you. You're on our yes list." I said, "Oh, what? I didn't realize." And so then we seriously put together this wonderful series called Glorious Color, which Ann James came out of retirement to produce for me, and we became really good friends. She was an old television producer from BBC, from the old school, and she was fabulous. And we have had an extraordinary friendship and relationship that grew out of that. And it was wonderful putting together this series. We take a week to do a half-an-hour show.
Are there any plans for any more?
No, I went to India and Vietnam to show people how I would like to do a further series, but it was never picked up by the BBC. So I just haven't done any more, but I would love to. I mean, I've done some interviewing of different craftspeople, and I like that. I like very much looking at other people's work and talking about it. I think it's extremely interesting.
So do you still glean inspiration from other people?
Yes, all the time.
And do you have a favorite artist, or?
No favorites. I just change all the time. Because something that's very badly designed or really bad taste, I'll make it my own taste. You know, I'll see the seed of a good idea in the worst possible things. But also my students in my classes really turn me on because, you know, they'll produce something and they'll be all apologetic. I don't know anything about color, and they will produce like the most beautiful thing. You think, what do you mean you don't know about color? You know, so I pick up a lot of ideas from the experimentation that goes on in our workshops. And just the spirit of those workshops is exciting.
You've just done, was it 6 weeks of workshops quite recently?
Yes, I did a whole trip across America, and that was extremely exciting. You know, and ending up in Houston, which is a huge quilt market, and it's like the mecca for quilters. People come from all over the world, and there's fabulous exhibitions, and you're able to talk to people, you know, from Norway or Japan or all these far-flung places, and really discuss how they see quilting and how they're using your fabrics and so forth. So it's very rich indeed, that experience.
Now you mentioned the collaboration of all of these photographs that we have for you in the book.
Yeah.
How long did it take to actually write this book?
Well, it took me 3 years just to decide how to approach it. I was completely stymied. How was I going to write my story? How was I going to get 75 years into, you know, a couple of hardcovers? And then eventually, when I finally decided how to write it, I suppose it was about 1.5 years, 2 years in the making, finding all the photographs and finding the rights for the photographs was the hardest part.
I think with the photography, I mean, even going back to when I was younger, I'm 25 years behind you, we didn't have cameras as standard when I was younger. There weren't so many photographs around.
Yeah, it was a big deal,
days.
wasn't it,
Yes.
to get the camera out.
The box brownie.
Yeah. You weren't there to catch some little, you know,
no, we pick
accidental
up
thing.
photos on our phones nowadays, but it was a big thing in those days. But you've got many, many pictures that go back through the whole of your career.
Yeah.
Did you keep a diary?
I kept many diaries, but I was so vague about the diaries. You know, a couple of them, we were trying desperately to find, well, does this work before 1985 or is this after 86 or whatever? And we couldn't tell because I didn't even put a date. I would just say Saturday. I wouldn't even say what year or what month, you know, so it was just pathetic. But eventually I had a wonderful editor who put all the ducks in a row by Googling everything and every name I mentioned, and she'd say, you couldn't have possibly arrived in England on that ship because it wasn't built until after you arrived, and so forth and so on. So anyway, we worked it all out.
Do you have, you've just said you spent 75 years now, that's 7 decades.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite decade? Where would you like to relive if you could?
Ooh. Do you know what? I'm having a wonderful time right now because I'm past all the angst. You know, it was wonderful being young and confident, but the flip side of confident is total angst. You know, I just read a quote saying, sometimes I think I'm God, but most of the time I know I'm a complete loser. You know, and I've flipped between those kind of things. I mean, you know, I do have confidence, but I do get very worried that I don't have the right education and all those things that everybody goes through. But as I get older, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like, okay, I got to this age and no one's blown my cover yet. You know, so I think I'm doing all right. I've got away with it. Yeah, exactly.
And you were saying when I came down to you how much you feel proud to be able to be appreciated within your lifetime because many artists have passed away before they become recognised.
That's very, very true. I mean, when I think of Van Gogh not selling one painting, I couldn't have stood that. You know, I would have gone on and done something else. You know, because I need a certain amount of feedback. I mean, I'm very stroppy, and I'll do what I think I should do. You know, and nobody's going to stop me. But on the other hand, it's very nice to be appreciated. And the life that I have now, when I'm able to travel all over the world and go to workshops and have people say, I love this fabric, and this is the way I'm using it. Look, I'm putting it in this quilt. I'm making it a border for this, and so forth. I'm getting all of that wonderful feedback from people all the time. So that you can see when you sit down to paint in the studio, to paint a painting, you're thinking, I wonder what that woman's going to do with this particular rose. Is she going to make a border? Is she going to make a diamond of it? You know, and I'm thinking all the time of all the people in the world using my things.
I think the one word that is mentioned an awful lot, and certainly from the emails that you've been sending in, is inspiration. You have been such a huge inspiration to so many people.
Yeah.
But you've also been commissioned and been collected by many famous names, royalties, actresses. Does anybody there specifically stand out? And even the Beatles have collected your work.
Yes, true. I mean, actually, Linda McCartney came to me and she said, would you come and design our ship? They had a little boat, and would you design it? And I said, I'm too busy. Can you believe it? Oh. You know, it's like I was starting a book, and I had an exhibition I was supposed to do, and I just thought I was too busy. But anyway, so that would have been wonderful. But I've done, you know, a lot of things for people. I think probably the most surprising was Barbra Streisand.
Oh, really?
You know, coming to the studio and just, you know, knocking on the door and saying, hello, I'm Barbara. And she's this little kind of woebegone little girl, you know, with wavy blonde hair. And she came up and she sort of poked around. And I thought, is this the great nose, you know, the great voice, you know? I mean, I couldn't see it. You know, she wasn't on stage. She was just being quietly herself. But she had a brilliant eye. She went through my knitting trunks and she picked out the most beautiful things. And she said, this is what I see wearing, and I want the color changed to this, and so forth. And it was a joy to work with her. You can see why those extraordinary celebrities are what they are, how they got to where they got, because they have a decisive, extraordinary vision of the world. You know, so all of the women that have come, you know, like Shirley MacLaine was wonderful to talk to. I mean, she was just so easy and so creative and so juicy, you know, and she picked out a great big coat and it looked fabulous on her, and, you know, off she went. So it's always a joy to work with these people who, you know, they got where they got for a reason. Yeah. You know, they've got it. They've got a brain, you know.
Do you know, I think you're exactly the same. I was chatting to Kaffe in the green room earlier, and I said, although I've seen interviews with Kaffe before now, the thing that surprised me, you go to the studios and it's mosaic as you walk through the door. There's mosaics in the ground floor hallway. There's the needlepoint and tapestries and colour and fabrics. And by the time I got to you on the top floor, I was expecting this incredibly flamboyant gentleman. And you're calm and you're softly spoken. And I think the way that you've described the people just now that you were describing, you're exactly that same character. It's almost like you're a peaceful person.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what I got in England. I learned to think before I spoke, you know, which was a weird concept to me. I mean, you know, when I was a young kid, I was a spoiled brat. I would dance on the tables, and I wore crazy clothes, and I always just said whatever came into my mind, you know, no matter how insulting it was or anything. So it is extraordinary to learn to be a bit more considerate and a little more thoughtful about life. For instance, I became a reader in this country. I loved the great respect that there was for words and sentences. And, you know, when I first did the Shakespearean play, and I heard my friend Brandon saying on the telephone, oh yes, Kaffe has read As You Like It. And I thought, read Shakespeare? Are you crazy? And so I went and I took this book and I read it, and then I couldn't quite get it. Of course, you know, you need to read it several times. And then I would go to these rehearsals and I would listen to that wonderful language. And then I would realize this country is obsessed with Shakespeare, and it's in everywhere. You know, when I would go on the street and I'd hear a policeman talking, he was speaking Shakespeare. You know, I would hear these lines, or some little gutter snipe on the street, you know, tough little kid talking, and he'd be using kind of Shakespearean phrases. Wonderful. So, and then I began to read many, many authors and just get into the wonderful philosophic way of looking at life. So it's been a wonderful experience being in this country.
There's one picture I was just flicking through trying to find to show you, because this is an interesting story as well. This was a painting that you were commissioned to do.
Yes.
Explain why you're standing like this, as though you're protecting it.
Oh, Well, this woman said, would you come and do a mural for our dining room? And I said, I would love to. And she said, I want a picture of my house in Ireland, and I want it, from the coast. And I said, fine. And then she was going to paint the room deep red. So I painted the house and the landscape in sunset. And then I surrounded it with flowers and cabbages and things to make it look like an old tapestry. She didn't like it at all. And she sort of bit her tongue, and then the last day when I was just finishing it up and putting a varnish on it, she said, how long is it going to